Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our presentation on security in the cloud. As general housekeeping rules, all attendees will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation through the Q&A feature. Today we will be reviewing what cloud backup is, security considerations when moving to the cloud, and security concerns with other types of backup. Our presenter today is John McGuire, the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Biologics. John has been with Biologics for 8 years and brings over 15 years of backup and storage industry experience with him. John?
Thanks, Melody, and thanks everyone for joining us today for Part 3 of our Backup 101, Security in the Cloud. What I'd like to do first is, for those of us who haven't joined us the past other webinars, is kind of explain what is cloud backup. First, of course, it happens online, meaning it's over the internet, and it's done to an off-site data center. And some of the key components of driving this from the cloud backup technology is because of faster internet speeds, the ability to compress and dedupe data, as well as on the back end, decreased storage costs, as well as other infrastructure, has actually made it more viable for online or cloud backup to be implemented. It's also a monthly fixed cost, meaning that there's no hardware required, and what you can really consider it as backup as a service, meaning you're outsourcing your backup to a different provider. What's interesting is looking at the pie chart here is the online backup use, and some of the things that I take away from it is first and foremost that 44% are actually using it or planning to use it in the next year. I look at that as from an adoption standpoint to be great, especially compared to where we've come in the past couple of years. But on the opposite side of it, me being the optimist, I look at it from a sales perspective, is that there's a large opportunity that 56% of the people aren't looking at it yet today. So as we move into the discussion of security and talking about it, not only the cloud but other technologies, the main reason why we added this piece to talk specifically towards security is that the #1 concern with moving data to the cloud is security for people. There are 3 ways to basically look at data protection in the cloud, how the different ways that can be protected. #1 is looking at the data itself. That means encryption and encryption keys, and we'll talk about those in more details in the slides coming. #2, where is the data residing? What are the tiers of the data centers of where the data is residing on vaults or on storage? And then lastly, any kind of special audits or regulatory boards. But really, who is handling the data and are they being audited?
Great, John. I'd like to take a moment to launch a poll here and find out from everybody, in regards to backing up your data on the cloud, what are your biggest concerns when it comes to choosing your solution provider?
How are those numbers looking, Melanie?
Looking good. It looks like a lot of people have a concern other than these 3 that we mentioned here, which is interesting to see. And I will actually close out the poll in about 5 seconds here.
And what I'd like to know is if there are others, I'd love to know the concerns. And what they could do is as post the questions where it's available to ask questions at the end, and we can answer those questions at the end, because I'd love to have the ability to see what those concerns are and hopefully how we can meet those.
All right, so you guys should be seeing the poll results right now. Looks like we have 27% are concerned about management of encryption keys, 9% are concerned about data center tiers, 14% are concerned with special audits, and then the remaining 50% have other concerns.
Interesting. I'd love to know those.
There we go.
So great. So, with that being said, it's a great segue into talking about the different key features of talking about security. So number one, as I mentioned, is really talking about how secure is the actual data. And really talking about encryption, is really securing the data not only in transit, but also in rest. And that's very important to make sure that that happens. I can go through over, Melanie provided me with some great information of what encryption means and some of the definitions. But I think the most important thing of it is looking at the bullet number 2 is really talking about managing encryption keys. And what I mean by that is looking at security, be it the cloud or any other technology used, but more importantly the cloud, is there's different ways that encryption can be handled. Number one, the actual service that you're using can manage that encryption key for you. So you don't have to worry about remembering what the key is, and especially in an emergency time to handle that. And in some cases, that's not a problem, depending on if you have any compliances to meet with, if there's anything to do with HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley or the SEC. So if you take it a step further, if that is an issue, well, by being able to manage your own encryption keys can, of course, help you meet those regulatory compliances so other people don't have access to your data, especially your service provider. However, one thing I will say is that if you do decide to create your own encryption key because it's a need or it's a requirement, make sure you have it available. We have run into situations where, from a healthcare standpoint, a customer was required to manage their own encryption key and didn't have the actual encryption key itself. Therefore, we didn't have access to their data. So it's very important. And then looking at the last bullet here is talking about 256-bit is recommended for cloud backup and has 14 cycles of repetition. 256-bit in most cases from a cloud storage side is pretty much the standard. However, just to kind of set a bar or set a comparison here is most people I'm sure that are on the call today do online banking with their bank. Most banks only use 128-bit encryption, which is perfect, which is a standard. But looking at it from a cloud perspective is we're double wrapping that as well to add that extra layer of security. So, we talked about, your data itself. We talked about, how is the data itself secure. But the next thing to talk about is where is my data? Where is it being stored? The one thing I like to always say is, not all data centers are the same. For some other technical people might be on here, I'm sure they've looked at data centers, co-locations, anything else that had to do with providing those types of technology, can understand that there's different tiers regarding your data. As you can see, it goes from tier 1 to tier 4, being tier 1 actually being the lowest tier. Some people get confused, but it doesn't go the other way. But tier 4 being the highest, and what it's really doing is it's adding you that that either 4 or 5 nines of reliability and availability, and it's guaranteeing it. So as you go up in tiers, your reliability and then availability actually increases. And the key to this also is when looking at where is your data, is also not only the availability and where the data sits, but the ability to wrap a service level agreement or an SLA around that. And having a tier 4 data center that the data center resides in gives you that ability because it does have that uptime. It does have that 4 or 5 nines of availability. So, as we continue on, we talked about the data, we talked about where it is, but what I really think is another key important piece of this is looking at it from a cloud provider is who's handling your data, but also how is it actually being handled. And when you look out across the industry, be it cloud backup or anything else, there's always there's a lot of regulatory boards, regulatory compliances, and audits that talk about information, how it's being held, and how it's being processed. From a cloud backup or cloud storage provider standpoint, what we've done is what you can do is go through what's called the SOC 2. This actually replaced the SAS 70 from last year, and it's the new standard moving forward. But basically, it's coming in. The SOC 2 is actually stating what the company is providing. It's reporting on the controls, the procedures, how the service works, how it's handled, and any steps in between from a business standpoint. When you add on top of it the type 2, this is actually where you're going through and doing the testing by a third party. So it's an actual true audit. So someone comes in and actually states that confirming that you're doing what you stated in the SOC 2. The third party comes in, they audit it, they test it, and they actually have a company that actually will write an audit, write a paper to verify that, yes, they are doing what they're doing. So I think it's a great another level to make sure of, who's handling it and how they're handling your data from a day-to-day basis. So, as we continue on, we talked about cloud backup and kind of the security concerns that are there. But what we wanted to do is now take it to another level and then start looking at some of the other technologies that are out there for data protection and see where some of the holes are from that standpoint to see where cloud storage can help cover those. So, of course, as it says here, cloud backup is one of the safest methods because it offers all those security points. And not that someone else's solution couldn't do it, but you can start seeing where there's a couple holes. Not all methods of backup offer robust security. We could discuss the differences not only between how the solutions work technically, but for this discussion, we're going to talk about security and some of the other methods. So what we are going to talk about is of course, the big one is tape. Number 2, we're going to talk about disk. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about replication. And replication comes into some of the more medium to larger size customers that might have greater requirements. And to be honest with you, from a technology standpoint, replication to me is more of an availability than it is more of a restore and data protection standpoint.
Great, and I'd like to take another moment here to launch another poll. This time we're interested in seeing what everybody on the webinar is using currently for their backup method. So again, cloud, tape, disk array, replication, or you're not backing up or you're not really sure what you're using to back up. And we will give it a minute here. Looks like we're getting, as results start coming in, we're getting a lot of cloud and a lot of tape users. Very encouraging to see that most people do know what they are using. We have a small percentage that either aren't backing up or don't know. Always a good thing. Right, now leave this open for about another 5 seconds here. All right, and let me share the results. So it looks like we have about 31% are using the cloud, 35% are using tape, 19% using disk or array, 4% using replication, and 12% either aren't using backup or aren't sure what they are using to back up.
Well, great. So Mel, I think this is a perfect segue into talking about some of the security concerns, cause of problems, but there are more concerns, things to look at to make sure that we're looking at different technology, and what should jump out at you. Well, number one, as we said there, I kind of knew it. Tape was a very big one. We see it a lot. It's not going away. It's not dying just yet. But number one, what are some of the concerns there? Well, really, if you look at tape, it's really mobile, meaning that it's carried off-premise, it's away from the building, and because of this, anytime that tape goes out the door, you're now increasing the percentage for it to become lost or stolen. And on top of that, looking at tapes in itself, the data is not always encrypted, and if it is, separate software is required to encrypt the data on tapes. Now, I know some backup technologies actually that back up the tape do actually have the ability to encrypt data, but in some cases there actually is an additional requirement or additional cost associated to that. So as we move to the second layer to talk about disk or hard drives, again, looking at this is the data is not always encrypted. And what I always think of when this would come up in talking about cloud backup, or even when I sold tape backup before, is, well, why is it any different? If you're backing up the disk, why isn't that data encrypted as well? Why should it be any different than that of tape? And then on top of that, who has access to the data? So what level of employees have access? And because the main key when you start talking about that is not knowing who has access, who's logging in, but there's always the case of talking about it. There's a rogue employee or someone who's recently been terminated. Talk to the third security issue regarding technology is distance to tape. Really, it really is now just combining the two. So it's taking the mobility of tape to be worried about. Now you're adding the access. You're adding the data not encrypted on tape. So you're combining the two. So that adds a little bit more concern from a security standpoint. And then lastly, getting into replication, which to me I don't consider a backup. I consider it more of availability. However, it's still a technology that people use. But really the key to this from a security standpoint is really talking about the physical security at each location. So if I'm replicating from one office to another or one office to another facility, is really talking about the physical access to those machines. And what I mean by that is, could be unscrewing the machine out of the rack and taking it away. Also, I think what's very important is talking about username and passwords on the accounts of the replication agents. If you're using a lot of different rep agents, it could be a lot of different installs. You've got to be careful to talk about if those aren't being changed, who has access, who is doing things. And then lastly, when looking at this, which should be part of the solution as well, but making sure that those connections need to be encrypted, meaning point-to-point from one location to another, so that there's no security concerns there. So when looking at different types of cloud backup, so we talked about the concerns of security and how that's handled in the cloud. We talked about the different technologies and what you should be looking at, or some of the problems or concerns could be from that standpoint. What I wanted to do is really look at the different types of cloud backup. And the one thing that's been going on for a while now is really kind of bundling or putting everyone under one umbrella. And here at Biologics, we know that we offer a different type of solution. And what we've kind of separated the two out to be is really one is a cloud backup type of technology, and the other is a cloud storage technology. And as you look through here and you start looking at some of the key components that make up the difference of them, you can start picking off some of them. The second one down, you talk about the difference between a business class infrastructure compared to more of a low-quality infrastructure. The key is some of these other providers that are offering, literally cents per gig, is how are they keeping their costs down? Well, they're not using this business class. They're using more of a low-quality infrastructure. Is the data replicated and non-replication? The second part of it, talking about fast and agile restores, as well as compared to slow, cumbersome restores, is the key to this and what we've seen in the industry and what we've seen from customers who have left the cloud storage type providers is they do things of throttling the bandwidth, meaning that they don't give you full access to your bandwidth to be able to restore that data. But also, on top of that, because what we said before is the low-quality infrastructure, this means the storage is slow, so it's going to take a longer time for you to get the data back as well. The other key piece of this is talking about the audit. Most cloud backup providers are going to have a form of a SOC 2 Type 2 to make sure that, hey, we're doing what we're telling you to do, and we're making sure that if you're sending your data to us, we're guaranteed delivering. We're making sure that we're going through the steps and procedures that need be. If you look at these other providers, these other big, box company, book company type providers, I'd be hard pressed to find if they have an audit done, or more importantly, if they provide any type of service level agreement. There's also the look to do between more support for server business class applications that are running on databases, Exchange email, things of that nature, then compared to just your basic file uploads. And then lastly, cloud backup is actually built not only to do backups and hold on to your data securely, but really the ability to do restores. And that can be at a dynamic ability, meaning granular ability to do specific applications. Could it be a single message in an email? Could it be an item in a SharePoint portal? Compared to just, of course, a store, a file level only. And also, the one key to talk about this too is that there's a cloud backup and cloud storage provider. Then on top of that, there's another layer that's it's a completely different technology, is more of a file sharing technology, which is not a backup and restore. That just gives you the ability to share information between multiple different users. So with that being said, we're going to get into a little bit about Biologics, and it's going to gear really towards, kind of what we mentioned. We're really a cloud backup provider. And as it says here, this is kind of all we do. We actually own our own proprietary backup technology. We've been around since 2002, meaning, we've been here for a while. We're not popping up in the past couple of years. We have multiple data centers that are located around the U.S. as well as one in Canada for some of our international customers. We have 8,000 plus business clients that's made up in all 50 states as well as 20-something countries. We have an extensive reseller program that's made up of over 600 resellers. And of course, we have our SOC 2 Type 2 audit as well. But to close out, kind of the last pitch here is talking about, Biologics and business class. Why are we kind of different than not only the cloud storage providers, but other online backup providers? Number one, we provide data protection with also local backup, meaning we give the customer the ability to do a local backup as well, so that you have another copy of your data, as well as the ability to restore data faster than having to restore from the internet. We have a single install that can protect multiple machines on the LAN. We do have the ability to handle your SQL, your Exchange, your business applications to handle that. Not only can we do client-based restores, meaning the software client that's sitting on the network to do backups and restores, but also we can do web-based restores, so that if you're not on the network and you need to restore a single file, you have access to that. We offer delta blocking, data compression, and deduplication as well to increase backup performance, meaning you're not taking a full backup every time after you've taken the initial backup. We do flexible retention schedules. This is great to meet specific requirements when it comes to specific regulations, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, SEC, but as well as business requirements that are needed depending on the type of application you might be using that you might need to hold on to for a year, 7 years from a retention schema. And then, of course, no hardware to be purchased. So before we get into the questions, I did want to make sure that everyone, hopefully joins us again next month to talk about Part 4, different services for different backups. That'll be next month, and you'll be sure to get an email out from us to jump on. But from there, I guess, Melanie, do you have any? Are there any questions?
Yeah, we've gotten a couple of really great questions in. The first one I'm going to give to you comes from someone asking about our data centers and exactly how important it is to have the highest level of data center tiers. The numbers didn't look all that different, so if you could just give a little more information on that.
Well, what's interesting is I agree. The numbers, they're such small percentages comparatively, but if you're offering a service, that percentage is also, baked across all your customers. But what I find interesting is if you really look at this, and I'm not bringing down the value of anyone's service, but if in theory, if all things are equal, if it's a matter of cents, literally for the service, wouldn't you rather be in a data center, I guess that is giving you the 4 or 5 nines of reliability, meaning they really don't have any downtime. And on top of it, if anyone isn't in something that's more of a 3 or 4 tier, they probably don't have a very strong SLA. And what I mean by that is that if you're going to use them, what are they going to stand behind? What is their service level agreement of that? If they can't retrieve the data that they have sent you, what are they willing to stand behind? And I think that's very important.
Great. The next 2 questions actually come about the difference between cloud storage and cloud backup. The first question has to do with the business class infrastructure and what exactly you mean by a business class infrastructure.
That's a great question, and for some people that maybe aren't as technical, I know we probably have a lot of technical people on the call today. Could be partners, could be people that actually run the technology at their companies. But what we do is really looking at it, knowing that if we do have a service level agreement, meaning we're guaranteeing data to be restored and returned, the only way we can do that is making sure that our infrastructure on the back end is built to the highest degree. What I mean by that is, number one, using best-of-breed equipment. We're not sitting out here using some no-name brand of storage or firewalls or switches or servers to access or back up and restore the data. Also, when you look at the ability of how we've built out our infrastructure, and I'm sure this is very similar to some of our other providers or other competitors, but what they make sure to do is adding redundancy within the network, meaning from the internet to the firewalls to the switches to the front-end servers to the storage, that in case something happens, if something was to fail, it has the ability to fail over, or there's a spare to be able to pick up for that. So the redundancy is important. But as well as, on top of that, not only backing up to one data center, but having the same ability in mirroring that to a secondary data center so that you can provide. And then one thing I always look at it, too, is making sure that, the storage is set up correctly, too. So, okay.
All right. And it looks like we've gotten actually a lot more questions in, so I'm just going to ask one more since we're nearing the half-hour mark here. And the last question is, what do you mean by slow restores when you're talking about cloud storage versus cloud backup? Okay,
that's a great, and what's interesting is, I use the phrase always as, you kind of pay for what you get, and you look at these other, big box or book companies that offer, cloud storage, and because it's not, like I mentioned before, business class, the storage can be slower. And what do I mean by that is, well, again, it's the best of breed technology that's using on the back end. It's also looking at, well, how is the data protected? Are the storage arrays, are they RAID protected, meaning from availability or if anything else happens? But also, one thing I've learned, is that in some cases, the way they keep their costs down is not only to use inferior equipment, but also to, what I call sprinkling the data across different arrays, so that when they have to compile that data, you're actually accessing different storage points in different places to compile the data back to then give that back to you. But then you add on top of it is what I mentioned in the slide that talked about the cloud storage and the compared to business class is the throttling of bandwidth. And we've heard this from multiple people who have left these companies and come to us, is that they found that it's actually almost unusable with regards to it. Because the bandwidth that they have available to them from the provider is so small that they can't restore the data. Now, granted, if it was just a single file, I'm sure it's okay. But if you're a business class user, meaning you have a lot of data, could be databases, email, you're not restoring a file. You could be restoring a lot of large amounts of data.
Great. Thank you very much, John. And I think at this point, we are going to just email everybody whose questions didn't get asked. We'll make sure that we get back in touch with you to answer your questions.
Great. And there were a lot of good questions. I like those. And, also one thing to do, Melanie, I don't know if they can do that as well, is they could probably email into sales@biologics.com if they have any other topics that they'd be interested in learning more about, or if they have any questions regarding the technology, feel free to give us a call at 978-777-7177. Option 1 is for sales. Of course, the email address is there, sales@biologics.com. Or please visit our website at www.dataprotection.com. There's a lot of good information there with white papers to be downloaded on interesting topics. There's the ability to do a free trial. There's a quoting tool there as well. Yeah, we look forward to seeing you guys next month for part 4.
Great. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.